time to start focusing on some details in the chair. This chair's got a ton of details, from carving the ebony plugs, and what I thought would be a good way of approaching this would be to take each section one at a time. And the first section I want to take is the lower rails and the stretcher. The lower rails don't have any carvings in them. However, they do have one 3/16 of an inch plug on each side, as well as the detail for the lower stretcher. The lower stretcher has the through mortise that we cut earlier, and what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to cut that tenon just proud of the mortise, and then we're going to pillow it. So we're going to round the edges on all four sides so that it looks just like a pillow kind of as it exits the through mortise. And then we'll make our plugs make the holes for our plugs for our lower rails. I unclamped the lower rails here. I wanted the clamp out of the way. And I have my Dozuki saw. And I just have some used sandpaper. This is a disc from my sander. And it's old. It's not going to get used again. And I just fold it in half. And what I'm going to do is fold it in half, place it again. And I'm going to apply pressure to the side right here. Alright, I'm just proud of that. So I'm just proud a little bit all around, which is great. You can tell it's a really nice tight joint. And just go cut it on the other side as well. So what I also have here is a little block plane, 150 grit paper, and 220 grit paper. So what I'm going to do is take this apart. So here, before I forget, what I want to do is I want to move some of my markings over to my tenons that are on the rails itself instead, as well as the markings for the stretcher, which side's for the left, which side's for the right, etc. Since this is the left lower rail, and I just want to make some marks on it, I want to mark this as the rear. I'm going to do these in pencil. Put rear, out, and front, out. This side then on my stretcher would be my left top. This here would be my right top. To start this process, I'm going to take the block plane and I'm going to just make a couple of quick swipes on the edges. And what that's doing is it's going to help prevent tear out and blowout in the wood. And with those done, now I'm just going to take some strokes. And once you got a nice chamfer around all four sides, you can take your sandpaper and start rounding this over. So not only am I rounding it over on the top down, but I'm rounding the sides, and then I'm rounding the corners as well. You'll see I'm taking my strokes across the entire length, but I'm trying not to go too much back, because we still need a lot of good wood here for our glue surface. Once you like the surface with the 150, come over to the 220 and let's clean that up. And what I'm doing with the sanding block right now is I'm rocking back and forth, helping to round everything over. Yeah, that looks really good. Really, really good. So let's go do the other side and we'll get these two sides done. Once you have something you like, I have a little bit of 320 grit paper here. And we're going to take the 320 grit paper and just do one final hand sanding on this. The reason why we're using the 320 is this is end grain, and end grain is darker with finish than face grain is, or long grain. So we're coming in with the 320 to take it back one more step so that when we put our finish on, everything stays as close to universal as far as the color of the finish is concerned. I got the planing board on the bench clamped in, and I've got my number 4 bronze smoother over here, and we're just gonna finish prep the surfaces for these these 3 pieces. You want to make sure that you're planing with the piece as well. So my grain here is going up like this, and that's the direction you want to plane in. And since the direction of the wood here was coming up, if we flip this over 180 degrees, we'll be going in the correct direction again. Okay, so now that I did both of these sides, we need to deal with the edges. And the edges here, once again, we want to look for grain direction. And if you look here closely, you'll see that the grain direction is coming up this way. So we want to plane in this direction. I'm going to help myself grab something to put in front of the plane stop that's lower than the actual piece, and then put the piece against that. And now let's focus on the rails. The rails are the same thing. We're going to plane the direction of the grain on one side, flip over, plane the other side, deal with the bottom, and then it's going to get a little more complicated. We've got to deal with the top here and the space in between. Once again, I want to read the direction of the grain. For me, the grain's going uphill this way, and I want to plane uphill with it. We have a nice long distance here, but we have distances that are different up here. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start with, we can use the plane on these top pieces right here. That's about all we can do with the smoother for this rest of this piece. We could maybe squeeze it in and get a section of it going, but that's not going to do much for us. So I'm going to take this and set it aside, and I'm going to come over and grab a scraper. So I'm going to scrape the surface. It's nice and flat because we did all this work on the router table. so we don't have any bumps or anything like that. So I can scrape here and then sand these little sections right here possibly. So let's take a look at that. The nice thing about scraping is you can typically work in both directions of the grain. It doesn't really matter much as long as everything's sharp. So what I want to do now is just do a little bit of sanding. I want to clean this surface up, do a little bit of sanding on the end grain here, and later on we'll do all of our roundovers. So I probably don't need to use the 150. I can just come in with the 220 grit. So we'll get this end grain here. Okay, now that we've almost finished surface prepping these rails and that stretcher, we still need to round over the edges and do a little bit of sanding. However, I do want to, right now at least, cut our first two mortises for our ebony plugs. So let's take a look at what we need. I have these square punches from Lee Valley. I have them in all the different sizes. This one happens to be 3/16 of an inch. You can also use a set of hollow chisel mortises. However, that should not be the set you use on your hollow chisel mortiser, because when you hit it with a hammer, you're going to cause the ends to mushroom or pillow, whatever you want to say. The ends are going to become a different shape than what they were originally when they were forged, and they're not going to work well on your hollow chisel mortiser anymore. So either a different set of hollow chisel mortises, or buy these great guys from Lee Valley, these square punches. You'll need a drill bit. I happen to have a whole set of drill bits that are just a little bit smaller than the punches. The one I use for a 3/16 of an inch is 9/64 of an inch in diameter. A drill, a square, and a pencil, and of course your parts. So let's lay these guys out. It's time to lay out these plugs. Now what we're looking at, right, is the outsides of each one of the lower rails. This being the right as you look to the chair, and this being the left as you look to the chair. And this is the rear, and that's the front. Okay? Now I'm going to tilt them up, and we're going to lay both out at the same time. Now if you take your square and you put it against here, you should have 3/4 of an inch roughly. If you planed it down a little bit, you may be losing a couple thousandths of an inch, but it's roughly 3/4 of an inch. Our square, the mortise we're going to cut with our square is 3/16 of an inch. Okay. And basically lay out 4.5/16 of an inch. And I'm just going to make a very light line right there off the outside. I'm going to come around and do the same thing over here. Just enough that I can see it, and enough that with a little bit of sanding real fast, it'll disappear. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to line this up so we're in the center here. This piece here, this distance here should be 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to pick the distance in from the front over. Okay, so that's just a tad over 4/16 of an inch. I'm going to take my little ruler. So now with that mark made, I can put my square back together, and I can make a very light line. You see I got my two lines there. And those two guys there, I'm going to take my square, hole punch. I'm going to align it against the line, and I'm going to take my punch and put the walls of the punch against the square. So now I press down, I got the two teeth there, they've bitten in, and let's start this. Okay, I just hammered in a little bit. Okay, the bit when it's chucked in is, I don't have enough clearance to get all the way into the wood, and that's fine. What's nice about these is that you can unscrew the body, or part of the body, come in, remove a little bit of material, screw it together, and there we have it. We have our little mortise for our 3/16 of an inch plug. With my 1/8 of an inch chisel, I'm going to come in here and work some of this material away. I'm being very careful not to apply any pressure against the outside walls. Okay, with that cleaned out, I'm just going to come back with my 220 grit and just do a little bit of sanding to get rid of those lines. And there you have it, 1 3/16 of an inch mortise for a 3/16 of an inch plug. All right, now that we've finished with the rails and the stretcher for now, we still need to round over the edges, and we'll do that with all the other pieces at the same time, so we have one setting for everything. But for now, I've put them over here on top of this shop cabinet that I have. In the top, I have a piece of MDF, 3/4 of an inch, but above it, I have this rubber surface that you can buy at Rockler, and I really love it. I put parts up here while I'm building, and at the end of a project, as I'm surface prepping all my parts, I will then put them over here. I keep the surface clean, so there may be some dust, but there's no debris or any little pieces of wood or anything else over there. And that helps prevent the pieces from getting scratched or marred or dented in any way. So I put everything over here and I just leave it. I took the chair apart and I have the front legs and the rear legs over here. And what we're going to do now is mark the mortise locations for our ebony plugs. There's two different sizes. There's a 5/16 and a 1/4 of an inch. And your plan to have a sheet that has everything marked out as far as locations are concerned. And we're going to do this too. I've already marked out all of the parts for the left legs, and we'll do the right legs together. I also cleaned them up a little bit, hit them with a hand plane just to make it easier to see, get those lines off that we had used earlier, so you can see the new lines we're going to draw. So let's get to it. This is my left leg already marked out, and this is my right leg. For the aprons, we reference everything from the bottom, and for the rails, we reference everything from the top. For the lower rail, we reference from the middle. So let's start laying this out. This is our right leg. This is where the front apron would enter into the leg. And this is where our side rails would be. The top being here and the bottom being here. The first thing we want to do is take our straight edge and we are going to come up 14.5 inches. So make a mark. So we're going to take our square and bring that line at 14.5 across. And then we're going to come up 5/16 of an inch. Make a mark. Bring that over. And then we're going to come up 3/8 of an inch for the spacing between the 5/16 and 1/4 of an inch plug. 1, 2, 3/8. Make a line. And then we're going to come up 1/4 of an inch. And make another line. Okay, so it's going to be our 5/16 plug and our 1/4 of an inch plug. Now what we need to do is mark one of the faces. We're going to mark the face closest to where the apron enters into the leg. We're going to mark that face for the 5/16, 1/4 of an inch in. In order for us to be 1/4 of an inch in, we have to, if we mark from this side and we set the square for 1/4 of an inch, because this is on an angle here, we won't actually be at 1/4 of an inch. So instead, what I like to do is bring the square flush with the surface here, find where 1/4 of an inch is, make a mark, then bring my square so the edge of that is at the 1/4 of an inch, and then strike my line and make a little squiggly for myself. That's where my 5/16 of an inch plug will be. The 1/4 inch plug is 3/8 of an inch in, so we'll do the same thing. Flush it up, find where 1, 2, 3/8 of an inch is, and then strike a line and make a little squiggly mark. Side here, that's got the side rails, we need to make marks, but we need to reference those from the top instead of from the bottom down here. And find where 16.5 inches is. So we'll get nice and flush on this side. This is where 16.5 inches is. That 16.5 inch mark right here I just made, that's where the top of our 1/4 of an inch ebony plug will be. So we might as well just come down 1/4 of an inch. And then from there we have to come down 3/8 of an inch, just like we went up 3/8 of an inch before. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8. Strike another line. And then we got to come down 5/16 of an inch. So now I got my 5/16 and my 1/4 of an inch laid out. And now I need to mark in from this edge here, which is where the rail is. So just like before, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring the square nice and flush with the piece. Come over here, I'm going to mark where 1/4 of an inch is. And while I'm here, I'll just mark where the 3/8 is as well. I'll shorten the square. strike a line, make a squiggly, strike a line, make a squiggly. So now I have my 5/16 inch plug and my 1/4 inch done. They are above, referencing down from the top and on the inside. And the same here, referencing from the bottom and the inside. Now I brought over my right leg right here, and this is looking at it from the back, the top being up here and the bottom being over here. So what I'm going to do is just bring the two of them so that they're flush on the bottom, and then transfer my locations over. With those locations transferred, this is the back from the front, because the front and the back both match each other. And if those locations transferred over, my reference edge is the inside, which should be square to the, this is being the side, the apron should be square to the side rail. And I'll just come and bring those lines across. Like on the front leg here, we need to come in and mark our walls for the closest to the mortise for our plugs. And since the mortise is over here, and this is nice and square to its opposite, this face here, which is where the side rails are, I'm going to mark in from this side instead of reaching all the way over like I did before. So the first mark is 1/4 inch, and that's for the 5/16 inch plug. And then I'll come in 3/8 inch for the 1/4 inch plug. Now we need to mark the side as well. So this is where the side rail would come in for the top. We'll mark the bottom in a minute. And we can just take the front leg where the rails are, the top rail, and do the same thing here and just transfer these lines across. Bring our lines through. Now I'm still set at 3/8 inch. I'm going to take advantage of that and just mark my 1/4 inch plug here. And then I'll do 1/4 inch for the 5/16 inch plug. Make a line and a squiggly. We can't forget to mark the locations for our lower rails as well. So here's where the mortise is, and the mortise is 1 inch long, okay? And we want to put our plug halfway between. So all we need to do to find the halfway point, that is to come over and mark where 1/2 inch is. Take that line across. And then we can come from there and come out 1/8 inch on either side. It's 1/8 there. It's 1/8 there. Bring those over. And then all we need to do is come in 1/4 inch, which I already have set. Make a little squiggly. And that's where our 1/4 inch plug will be for the lower rail right here. And before we forget, let's transfer that guy over to our rear leg. I just marked the top and the bottom of it. I didn't mark the middle. And 1/4 inch in. Perfect. As we move up the leg, we have a couple more things we need to mark out. We need to mark out our mortise location for where our arm is, which is here. And then we need to mark 2 locations where our crest rail is, and those are 5/16 inch. To help us out with this, I brought over the offcut from the leg. It's a good idea to keep this around until you're done with the chair. So the offcut here, what that allows me to do is bring a square and with these two pieces next to each other and flush on the bottom. I can then draw a line that is horizontal or a parallel plane to the bottom of the leg. The first thing I'm going to do is bring a slight line, very light, across. So that's I brought a line across where the top and the bottom of the mortise are. And then I'm going to make a little tick mark on each side. I can come here and make a line all the way across. Now these lines are parallel to each other and they're parallel to the bottom of the leg as well. With these lines drawn here, the next thing I want to do is come in and locate my 5/16 of an inch plug I'm going to put right here. So I want that plug to basically sit right in the center here. But from above, looking down, I'm going to kind of make a mark where I think center is. We'll bring the square there. We're going to make a line. So this line is now vertical and parallel to this outer wall here. And so from there I can come in roughly 2/16 over here, 2/16 there. I'm short of 16, so just a little bit fat. So that's 5/16 of an inch between here and there. So I think that looks pretty good. The next thing we want to do is place that plug in the center. We want to mark it off from the center. So I'm going to come here, bring my ruler over, and find the distance between these 2 points. And for me, on this one, that distance is 3/4 of an inch. So 3/4 of an inch is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 eighths. So that's 1, 2, 3 eighths is the center. And if 3 eighths is the center, I'll bring that line across. So if that's my center point, then I just need to come about 2.5/16 and 2.5/16 over here. And there's my 5/16 of an inch mortise for the arm. The next location we need to mark is the 5/16 of an inch mortises that go on the rear leg where the crest rail enters into the rear leg. Since you pattern routed this, this should be relatively equal on both sides. So what we need to do is come here, find where the bottom is, and referencing off the actual piece itself for the crest rail, we'll make a mark. And we'll make another mark at the top. So now what we can do is with our top marked and our bottom marked, we can reference off the end of the leg now. So what I want to do is take my square and that's about 1/2 inch, and I can draw a line. So I came with my square 1/2 inch here, down, and then I will come with my square Make a mark for my 1/2 inch. And then with my square 1/2 inch up, I'll make another line. And now we have the bottom of our the bottom and the top of our 5/16 of an inch plugs. So the next thing we need to do is come up 5/16 of an inch and come down. Well, we can do that, or we can just say, hey, let's find the wall right here and then reference against these two corners. And that's what I'm going to prefer to do here. So for these two, we're going to come in 1/4 of an inch from the side of the wall. And what we should be doing is coming in 1/4 of an inch, not from the bottom, but from the top here. So we want to start in 1/4 of an inch, and the same thing here. We want to come in 1/4 of an inch and then come down. So I'm going to take my square, find where 1/4 of an inch is, make a mark. That's where 1/4 of an inch is. Now, you can take the square, tighten it up, reference against the top of the leg, draw a line, and make a squiggly. So now we got 2 square points. We'll do the same down here. Draw a line. Make a little squiggly. I'm going to make sure I'm good. The 1/4 of an inch is fat, but that's okay. Yep. Now we know where our 5/16 of an inch plugs will go. So we finished marking out all the mortises for our 5/16 and 1/4 inch plugs on both our front legs and our rear legs. It's time now to cut those plugs, but there's one thing you should do before that, which is to mill up a piece of material that is 3/8 of an inch thick, which is the same thickness as the mortises in our legs. What this is good for is you take this piece and you'll cut it down to a shorter length, but you take the piece and you insert it into the mortise here. And then when you cut these plugs with your either a hollow chisel mortiser, and I'm going to use the punches from Lee Valley. When you cut these, if you go through the wall all the way, you're not going to blow out all the material that's in the inside of the mortise, and instead you have this backing board that you would either be potentially drilling into by accident, or if you go too deep, or actually with the punch itself. So it's just a little bit of backup, some protection in case you do go through. You don't blow out the entire wall of the mortise. So I'm going to cut this guy down to a more manageable length and then do another one that's about 3/4 of an inch thick that I'll be able to use on these lower rails as well. This is just a quick look at everything I'm going to use to cut these plugs except for the drill. So I've got a nice square here, and we're going to use that to register our plug square hole punches against. I have a 1/4 inch and a 5/16. Then I have matching bits for those. The bit for the 1/4 inch is 13/64 of an inch. And then the bit for the 5/16 plug punch, that is 17/64 of an inch. And we'll need a couple of chisels, some smaller chisels, and then these 3/8 inch spacers we're going to put into the mortises on the legs to help prevent blowout if we do go through the mortise wall. I'm going to cut the 1/4 inch plugs first. There's less of those. I can go through those pretty quickly. So let me show you how I do that. The first thing I do is I take a square and I bring that up onto the leg, and then I bring it just to where the line is. I can then bring over the square hole punch and line up the square hole punch. And once I have that lined up, I can take the square away. And now that I know this plug that I'm about to cut is going to be square to the leg. So with that there, I'm going to come in with a hammer, make a couple of hits. That sets my plug. The bit here is long enough that I can drill in and without having to take the body off. You'll see that I had some blue tape on there, and that was to prevent me from drilling too deep. I'm going to drill one more time. Let's pull the plug out. And with my chisels, I'll come in here and clean out this waste. You want to make sure that you don't put any pressure against the outer walls. You don't want to expand the hole. And once I've cleared the waste out a little bit, I'm going to come here with my 1/4 inch chisel. And just come around all 4 sides and pare down some of this material. And then with my smaller 1/8 inch chisel, I'll come in and remove that material. Now we got a great 1/4 inch square mortise. So let me grab a couple more of these and do the 5/16, and then we'll come back and focus on some of the more delicate mortises to cut on the rear leg. I've been going around and cutting the mortises on the rear legs, and I just wanted to point something out, and that is that you need to reference off the correct face with your square. So for instance, I'm looking at the left leg right now as you face the chair, the left rear leg. And so for this one, we are flat for sure, or we should be on the inside, because this was a face that did not have any pattern routing done to it. So I want to take my square and reference that edge when I bring over my square hole punch. I finished cutting all the 1/4 inch and 5/16 inch plugs for the front legs. On the rear legs, so far, I've cut the 1/4 inch and 5/16 inch plugs for the lower portion of the legs. We still have some more plug mortises to cut, and those are the 2 in the top of the leg and then the 1 in the side of the leg where the arm enters. The first thing we want to do is put in some kind of backing. So I'm going to use this loose tenon that I've been using as my test piece. I'm going to push that in and get it deep here and all the way along the wall over here. So if in case I do go through, which I don't want to, it'll support the drill or the chopping through, and it'll prevent blowout. I'm not going to use my square this time to line up my square hole punch. Instead, this time what I'm going to do is come in and bring the square hole punch 1/4 onto the lines where they meet, and then get the other 2 corners along the line in the vertical and the horizontal position. Now, just like before, we'll take a hammer, Okay, that one's good. The next mortise we're going to cut is the 5/16 of the inch mortise where the arm comes into the leg. And we drew that over here. So what I'm going to do is clamp up my arm. But my leg to the bench. And with that clamped up, I'm going to come in and take my square hole punch. And I like to align it to the edges of the outline of the mortise I drew. So I have all 4 points along the 4 points where the lines met up. For this one, you need to be very careful. We don't have much material to go down. So we can't come in here and just try to remove a lot of material at once. We need to do a little bit at a time. So we'll come in and do a little drilling. Great. So now we have a nice crisp outline along all 4 sides. So I'm going to come in with a small chisel and start popping this waist out. All right. That looks like a nice 5/16 of an inch mortise for a 5/16 of an inch plug.